We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
Speaker today. His book is called Leadership Agility. He's been giving a lot of talks and presentations on this topic, and I'm going to let Bill come on up here and tell us some more.
Here I am.
There you go. Right up here. I'm going to give you the mic. Oh, I'm going to pause for a minute. Let's give him a welcome. Come on. Just going to pause for a second to change computers.
All right. Well, it's great to be with you tonight. Thanks for coming out in this rather challenging weather. As Nancy was saying, I have been doing a number of talks with Agile groups. A little over a year ago, I was invited by the Agile Alliance to a think tank in Dallas, Texas, where we spent 2 days in open space looking at the question of the future of Agile, and particularly around issues like Agile teams plateauing after a certain point, or Agile teams being successful, and then the question becomes, well, why can't we do something like this in the rest of the organization? So kind of looking more beyond just Agile teams to Agile organization, and what does that really look like? So that was a fascinating experience for me. I was the only non-dyed-in-the-wool Agile person there. My background is organization development, leadership development, for about 3+ decades, working with leaders, senior leaders particularly, and helping them develop more effective teams, and with organizational change, and all of that. And I'll tell you a little bit more later about about the book and how that came about. But that's my background. All right, so here's what I'd like to cover tonight. First of all, I want to take a fresh look at leadership in an Agile context, Agile leadership, using all of this stuff that I've learned over the years and from the research. And we're going to focus particularly on what I call 3 levels of leadership agility. In other words, the idea being that leadership agility is a quality that a leader can have. It's a capacity. It's not just a set of procedures to follow. And that this capacity develops in stages. It's like this is how leaders can grow in becoming more agile. So we're going to really get into that, and I'm going to wind up playing some audio clips that are going to illustrate the differences between each of these 3 levels of agility, seeing how a particular leader would respond differently to the same leadership challenge and if he was operating at different levels of leadership agility. And I'll say just a little bit at the end about how do you, using this framework, how do you assess your leadership agility or that of people in your organization? How do you develop leadership agility? How do you develop what I call a more agile leadership culture? But I particularly want to leave plenty of time for Q&A, because that's always the most live, rich part of the evening. So, to get started, let's just say, well, why? Here's what I hear the most when people say, we need more agile leaders. What do they mean by that? Okay, people are this is speaking out of the Agile framework. So, well, we need more agile leaders because that's what you need in order to really make agile adoptions work. It's what you need to sustain agile adoptions over time. And it's what you need to make the whole organization more agile. And usually when somebody is speaking from that, within that agile framework, they're saying, do more of the same kinds of practices that we do with software teams, but in other parts of the organization. So that's what I sort of hear as a lot of the current thinking about why we need more agile leadership. And I think the way that people in the Agile world, my impression, would think about Agile leadership is that Agile leaders are leaders who really uphold Agile principles and practices and the values, the philosophy that underlies Agile, right? Because it's so important that people understand and support the underlying philosophy. And, an Agile leader would be somebody who actually uses, I have a client right now who's brought Agile into his software organization and is using some Agile methodologies with his executive team. And that's consistent with what I hear a lot of people in the Agile world talking about when they say we need more Agile leaders. And what I also hear a lot is the way that you become an Agile manager is that you, or leader, is that you stop being a traditional manager. Or another word other phrase is you let go. The only problem with those kinds of formulations are they don't tell me, if I'm the middle manager, for example, they don't really tell me what to do instead. And so what I'll be doing tonight is presenting I think, a fresh take on Agile leadership that's, I think, fully, it's not at all at odds with the way that people tend to think of Agile leadership in the Agile world. But I think you'll find that it's additive. So I'm going to start by just defining agility very broadly. So this could apply to organizations, to teams, to individuals. That it has to do with the ability to deal with rapidly changing conditions and interdependent circumstances, situations where you have to work well with others or with other groups or with stakeholders in order to be successful in doing what you're doing. Now, in the book, I write about what I call the agility imperative, that all organizations, regardless of what part of the planet you're on, regardless of what sector you're working in, are faced with a real imperative to become more agile in the sense of being better able to deal with these conditions. So the two big forces that I think are driving this agility imperative, and I think it's the reason that the Agile Manifesto came along and the whole Agile movement and a number of other things, is that, first of all, we have an accelerating pace of change in our world, right? It's not just moving fast, it's accelerating. So that means that as fast as it is now, one of the few things we can be certain about in the future is it's going to be faster in the future. Which is, I think, to really take that in is kind of a mind-boggling thought. Are we ready for that? For this to keep on accelerating? And then on top of that, we have this other big, deep trend in the world economy, which is increasing interdependence. Now, increasing interdependence is driven by the kinds of things that are listed here on this slide, but the point I want to make about both of these forces is that, yes, they're out there in the world economy. Yes, they're out in our business environment. But they're also in our face every day because they shape the very problems and issues that we face every day. They make the pace of change, makes these issues, there's more novelty in those issues that we face. It's not so routine. You see a problem, it's not like, oh yeah, we know how to solve this. It's like, well, we sort of know something like this, but there's also some new things in it. And then there's the extra complexity that the interdependency brings into the problems we have to solve, right? So we have more novelty, more complexity in the issues that we deal with every day. So I think this is what is calling all of us and all of our organizations to become more agile in the sense of being able to deal with these two forces more effectively. Now, there was a survey that was done recently that was co-sponsored by EMC here in Boston and a UK journal called The Economist. And they surveyed executives all over the world, just a couple of years ago, and they asked them about organizational agility. Now, they're not talking specifically here about the Agile software movement. They're talking about it in this broader sense that I'm saying. In other words, the ability to deal with rapid change and complexity. 90% of the executive said that agility, organizational agility, is essential for the continued growth and success of their businesses. However, most of them acknowledged that their organizations were not as agile as they need to be in the kind of environment we're dealing with today. So they were asking an interesting question, which is, okay, so if it's so important, how come you think your organization isn't as agile as it needs to be? And there were, as you might imagine, there's all kinds of responses that were provided, because organizations are complex things, and there were many different aspects of an organization's function that were mentioned, including structures and systems and IT systems. But the thing that really rose strikingly to the top in the responses was the organizational culture as being the biggest barrier to greater agility in organizations. So we were, at my company, ChangeWise, we were pretty fascinated with this finding. And we decided to team up with the Institute for Corporate Productivity, which does a lot of corporate research. It has access to a lot of people who regularly provide input to their surveys. And long story short, two key findings that we had from that study was that the biggest factor in whether the organizational culture was supportive of organizational agility, to help make it happen, was the leadership, what I call the leadership culture, meaning the part of the organizational culture that sets the norms for, this is what real leadership looks like, right? Because think about the organizations you're in. Those organizations have a leadership culture in the sense that you get a distinct feeling for what kind of leadership is valued and what kind of leadership isn't particularly valued, right, in the organizations that you work in. And as you'll see, as we go into these different levels of agility, what we found was, just to kind of jump ahead for a second, that the higher the level of agility of the leadership culture, the better, the more agile the company, and the better the business performance, just using traditional business performance measures. Okay. We then did, we have a firm that we collaborate with in Sweden. We replicated the same, we did the same study there. Same results. So anyway, what I'm trying to do now is just put leadership agility into a larger context of organizational agility and say that if you're looking for ways to make an organization more agile, there are a number of things that you need to do. But one of the most high leverage things that you can do is to raise the agility of your leaders and your leadership culture. Okay. Which raises the question, what is leadership agility? Let me ask you. We are taking two words here that are kind of from different realms, and we're putting them together, right? Agility is a term that comes out of sports, or gymnastics, or dance, right? Physical. It's a physical capacity. Leadership is not so much being able to lead tall buildings, it's a more mental and emotional kind of activity, right? So we're kind of putting these two things together. So I just want to ask you to just sort of taking a fresh slate, what are some words and phrases that come to your mind when you hear the words leadership agility? What kind of characteristics would you think a leader would have who has this leadership agility capacity? Yeah.
Yeah, just, I don't know quite how to say it, but being receptive to finding out what's really going on without judging that. Being open to...
Yeah. Being receptive to what's really going on without immediately judging it, but to really understand it, is what I hear you saying, right? Yeah, that's great. That's definitely part of it. Yes, sir.
Adapting.
Yeah.
Often and
Yes, so adapting, so putting these two things together, right? As you see what's actually going on, which may be a little different than what you expected, or what your management team or your whatever team expected, then to be able to adapt to those conditions in a way that makes you more effective, right? Yeah. What else? Yes?
Fostering the capability.
Fostering that capability in other people.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, definitely. What else?
Knowing what are the key feedback loops in the organization.
Yes, yes. Knowing the key feedback loops in the organization and using them, yeah.
Responsive rather than reactive.
Mm-hmm. Say a little bit more what you mean by that. What's the difference for you between responsive and reactive?
Responsive pays attention to the inputs that are coming in and going on and doing something positive with them. Reactive tends to put up a wall and try to work around it.
So really taking, responsive is really taking it in and working with it in a constructive way.
Yeah.
Reactive is more putting up a wall.
Putting the fires out. So
Yeah, putting out the fires or just kind of being on automatic maybe,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Increased delegation and enabling self-organizing teams.
Yeah, delegation or self-organized. I'm repeating these just so to make sure we get them on the tape, partly. Yes?
I think I see it the two parts. I think a lot of people already said it, but I'll try to say it simply. I think it's the ability to recognize change.
Mm-hmm.
And then part two is prioritize what change, what action is needed to changing environment.
Right, so to be able to see when change is happening, and then what is it that really needs to be done? What's the top priority way to respond to that situation? Take one more. Yeah, Ron?
Kent Beck's book, From Way Back, 2 words, Embracing Change.
Embracing change, okay. So what I want to do next is I want to give you a brief experience of leadership agility, of the essence of it. And to do that, I'm going to ask you just for a minute, stand up for a second. Okay, I'm going to reassure you that, at least so far, no one has been seriously injured or embarrassed as a result of this little exercise. What I want you to do is get your feet very firmly planted on the floor. Bend your knees slightly to just sort of accentuate your feeling of being grounded where you're standing. And then put your hands like this, lean forward slightly, and I put all of your attention on the space between your hands, right? Almost like you're looking at a screen. So this is us getting very absorbed in any particular task that we're doing during the day, right? We do this many times a day. Now I want you to just open up your arms and more importantly, open up your vision and let your vision expand to include as much of the room as you can. Okay? So if you're really creative, you could even move a little bit, right? All right, so you're taking in more of what's going on around you, the bigger context. Now I want you to take whatever insight, new awareness comes from that, and bring it back into focusing on whatever really needs to be done next. Okay. So, thank you. You can sit down again. My leg. So this is just another way of maybe experiencing what many of you were just talking about, right? There's this receptivity piece, awareness piece, right? Of, well, wait a minute, what's really going on? Really taking in, when you're talking about responsive versus reactive, right? This is being able to step back, really take in, get a bigger context, get a bigger perspective, deeper perspective, right? And then to be able to take action from that place, which may mean getting back and focused on something very specific, right? And then to keep that process going. So what we found was that Agile leaders were able to move back and forth very fluidly between being highly engaged in action and then being able to step back and reflect, not necessarily for long periods of time, but just being able to step back and get a bigger, oh, let's see what's going on in this meeting. Not exactly what I had in mind. Okay, now I sort of see what I need to do, so then I move back. So you can apply it to virtually any situation. So I would say if you take nothing else from tonight's session, and I hope you'll take a lot of things, I hope you will take this and think of the possibility of leadership agility as a practice, as something that you can do every day to make yourself more agile? This process of stepping back more regularly. There's so many things that grab our attention and then pull us down into a narrow focus. Happens all the time. So it's not like that you could prevent that from happening, but can you keep stepping back and re-engaging and stepping back and re-engaging? So very central to leadership agility. Now, that's one of the things that emerged from this book. Now, the reason for doing the research for the book, there were several, but a key one was we've got this really different kind of organizational environment that we have to deal with today. It seems intuitively like that environment requires a different kind of leadership than what has been traditionally successful. Is that true? And if so, what is this new kind of leadership that's needed? So that was a very central question in the book. So we found leaders who were very agile, in other words, very able to deal with, very successful in leading organizational change or leading teams or even having tough conversations in conditions where things were changing very fast and a lot of interdependencies to deal with. And we said, well, how do these people think? How do they process information? How do they behave? And that's what's documented in the book. There are lots of real-life stories, and then we sort of step back and say, what are we seeing in those stories? We're seeing this, this, and this, so we have an analytical lens as well. One of the key findings from this research is that leaders develop this leadership agility capacity by going through different stages of growth, stages of development as leaders. And so I want to, first of all, just kind of give you this impressionistic view of different stages. There's a whole field that I will go into, but it's called stage development psychology. There's a way to, they've been able to document, and this is a field that started in the 20s and then it just exploded in the last few decades. There's an ability to document how it is that we, starting as kids, but more importantly for us in organizations, into our adult lives, as we develop the capacities, for example, to think in more complex ways or to be more empathetic with stakeholders who have different views than we have, there are distinct, definable, recognizable stages that can be measured that people move through. Now, what we did was we said, oh, so how does this affect leadership? And what we were able to do was to take, I'm going to focus tonight particularly on these 3 levels of agility, or stages: expert, achiever, and catalyst. And what we were able to do was to really tease out what is the, as I said, the underlying thought process and the behavior associated with each one, and how does each stage grow out of the one before it? How do you develop from one stage to the next? Now, as I said, yes? Yes.
Co-creator, logic code, what's that?
The co-creator, which is I'm not going to get into a lot tonight because there's such a, we're talking about a very small slice of leaders that are doing this. It's a very deep level of collaboration. So when their orientation toward creating things or making things happen or creating organizations is one where they operate at a very deep level of collaboration, and they understand, and they also understand if something goes wrong, they understand that everything is very deeply interactive. So if something went wrong, it means I'm part of the problem, as well as other people. So in a sense, every stage here is another level in understanding what I just said and being able to operate that. But it becomes particularly striking and evident at that point.
Yeah, so if you take like most really large successful organizations like Oracle or Apple or things like that, so those the people who founded those companies and are leading those companies have to be really good leaders to have made a company that big. So are they, like are most of those type of people at the co-creator or synergist level, or?
No.
No. Okay.
No, I'll tell you what. So the question was, are most people in highly successful companies at one of these top?
I'm talking about the top executive, like the founders of the people.
Right. Just being a company founder or being a successful executive or being in the C-suite, none of those things automatically get you into one of these high stages of development. What I'm going to suggest is that I go into some detail about the Expert Achiever Catalyst, and then we'll be able to have more of a conversation about these levels and how it relates to other real life situations and so on. Before I play these audio tapes to illustrate the difference between the three levels, I want to kind of give you a visual image that you can hold on to, that you could actually remember these three levels after you leave tonight. So a week from now, you'll go, oh yeah, I remember that picture of the expert. It was the guy, oops, I got a little glitch here. It was the guy climbing up the side of the mountain. So what is being symbolized here is when I'm leading at the expert level, and I'm just going to give you a very impressionistic piece that we're going to make a little more sophisticated in a few minutes, but I'm honing my expertise. I am moving along in a rather tactical manner. I am addressing the problems that come up as they come up. If I am perhaps leading, the underlying metaphor on these slides is going to be mountain climbing, obviously. If I'm leading a team up the mountain, and I'm doing it as an expert, I'm going to be relating to these other people one-on-one, perhaps mentoring them and helping them hone their expertise. But I'm not going to be really building them as a team that can work together. As an achiever, I have a strategy for getting up the mountain. And I can adapt that strategy as weather conditions change. If I'm leading a team, then I'm really thinking a lot about what can I do to make that a team? How can I make sure that everybody's really working together effectively? Everybody's really highly motivated, even if we hit some discouraging spots in the climb. But I'm thinking about, that's part of my job as a leader of this expedition, is to make sure we have a well-functioning team. Catalyst level. Now, at each of these levels, I can still do the things I could do at the previous levels. Right? I still got those mad, crazy climbing upside of the cliff skills. I can still lead an expedition to the top, and I'm still doing that. But my vision now is not simply to get to the top of the mountain. It's also, in the process of climbing this mountain, I want to build the kind of team where everybody is just super engaged, and anyone can step forward at any time and exert the kind of leadership that we need to get ourselves to the top. And at the end of the day, I want everyone in that team, because of the way I've worked with them, to be capable of leading their own expeditions up the mountain. So each one of these, you might notice, is the level at which I can step back, the depth and breadth with which I'm approaching the leadership job gets broader and deeper with each level. Okay, so before I do the audio clips, just want to mention something to kind of put this in context a little bit. This begins to relate to some of the questions that are being asked. The research indicates that, generally speaking, that the percentage of managers that have the capacity to operate at these different levels somewhat is very close to what's being represented on the slide. In other words, 45% expert, and with a few people actually not quite even at the expert level. 35% at the achiever level. Okay, now we're talking about 90% of leaders. and only 10% at the catalyst level or beyond it. Now, why is that of any significance whatsoever? Well, these aren't just different styles. These are different levels of capacity. And what we found in our research was that the kind of environment that we're in today, the most effective leaders are the ones that can readily call on those catalyst level capacities and lead from that place. So I think, as I present these ideas and work with clients and so on, many people say, well, yeah, okay, this kind of, I knew this. I just didn't have the words, I didn't have the percentages, I didn't have the framework, but yeah, that just sort of intuitively fits my experience of being in my organization. And, the catalyst level leaders aren't necessarily found at the top. They could be found many different places in an organization. Okay, so with that context, we're going to look not only at these three levels of agility, but we're going to look at them in three specific arenas. Yeah?
I guess I'm sort of surprised at that number, that percentage being so high for the expert in achievement.
Uh-huh.
What do I think?
I'm sorry, you're surprised at what?
At the number being 90% or
Uh-huh.
I guess 80% in the achievement expert category.
Mm-hmm.
Does that surprise anybody else? It's too high. Yeah,
Hmm?
it's too high. I agree.
Oh, you think it's too high?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me fine-tune it a little bit for you and see if we can get a little closer together, which is that what we're really talking about here on this slide is having the capacity to do it, which is a condition for doing it. But it doesn't necessarily, not every leader who has the capacity actually consistently behaves this way. We have other data that suggests, because we have this Leadership Agility 360 that we've been using for about 4 years, the data suggests that the number of leaders who actually consistently act at the catalyst level is more like 5 or 6%. What would you say? What would you estimate?
I mean, in the expert and the achiever, I'd be surprised if it was 50%.
Oh, and so where do you think the other 50% is?
Below, conform.
Oh, I see. Well, okay, let's try. Let's take. We're going to take a deeper look at what these three levels mean, because I haven't told you too much about them yet. Maybe that'll make a difference, or maybe your organization is a little different than some of the other organizations. But anyway, what I'm going to try to do is to help you understand as well as we can in an event tonight what's really entailed in these three levels of agility. And as I was saying, I'm going to break it down into some key tasks that leaders have, right? Leaders lead organizational change, they lead teams, and they have what I call pivotal conversations, tough conversations whose outcomes really make a difference for the organization. So to set this up, this material that I'm going to present now is from the second chapter of the book. It's the only place in the book where we have fictional stories. But those fictional stories have been written to synthesize all of the research that we did. So in a way, it's very true to life, even though it's a made-up story that consolidates a lot of stuff. So this scenario, we're gonna imagine a company called Overmyer. That's an advanced manufacturing technology company, right? They make robots for factory floors, etc. It's a family business. It's been very successful in the past. It's been an industry leader. However, the CEO, the founder, met with a rather untimely death, and his daughter, who's an executive in the publishing industry, came in to try to salvage the situation because the organization had started to plateau and wasn't really doing so well in the last few years. So she led the effort to hire a new CEO, to essentially turn around the company. So the mandate for the new CEO, as you would imagine, is to restore its profitability and to make it into an industry leader. this is no small task. This is an organization or business like, I would say, probably most businesses today, where things are changing very rapidly, customer needs are changing very rapidly, new technologies are always coming online, et cetera, and there's a lot of competition. So let's take a look at the person that they selected to be their CEO, to turn around the company. We're going to call this person Ed. We could also perhaps call this person Edie and change the gender, but we're going to, just for the sake of this example, we're going to go with Ed. And if you look at his qualifications, you see, yeah, this is a lot of the stuff that you'd want a CEO of a company like this to have, right? The right kind of education, the right kind of temperament, quick study, assertive, and a strong track record. In fact, this guy had been the CEO of a smaller AMT company that was actually beginning to take market share away from Overmyer, so what better person to hire as your CEO? Now, what we haven't taken into account, though, and what most searches don't take into account, is what's the level of agility of this leader? So we're going to run through 3 different scenarios and show how Ed, as an expert, versus Ed as an achiever or a catalyst, would deal with this. How many of you have seen the movie Groundhog Day? Right, pretty much everybody. How many people have seen it over and over and over? Me too. All right, so this is kind of like that. We're going to kind of take Ed through a little bit of a journey and give him a shot at the same day, or the same, actually 7 months, over again at a new level of agility. So what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to think about a couple of things. Some of you may want to take notes. The first question is simply, what are some of the key characteristics of the expert level that you think that we're trying to illustrate with this scenario? The second thing I want you to think about as you're listening is, let's say that shortly after this point, this is a conversation that takes place 7 months after the person is hired. Let's say that not too long after this, the company adopts Agile. I want you to be thinking about how hospitable an environment for Agile is the kind of environment that this particular leader is creating. So think about characteristics and hospitality. What I'd like to do now is just tell you what I think the key takeaways would be. The first thing is that there are some key, when we operate at the expert level, and I would submit that any of us at any point in time might actually be operating at this level, this tactical type of level, for a variety of reasons. Perhaps because that's exactly what's needed in the situation, or sometimes because it's really not exactly what's needed, but we're doing it anyway. So we're kind of assuming that the leadership is really all about using your authority and your expertise to get things done. Right? And when we're leading change, our orientation is tactical. We're making incremental improvements within the boundaries of our authority. We're not really initiating cross-functional change initiatives. And we're not really, we know those stakeholders, those pesky stakeholders are out there, and they're important. But in truth, we just don't have all that much energy and interest and activity in terms of engaging with them. When we manage our team, we're actually looking at our team more as a collection of individuals than we are looking at them as a system, an interactive system. So this is partly because we're not stepping back that far when we step back as an expert, right? So we tend to think one problem at a time, one person at a time. It's the way we tend to focus. So you saw that reflected in the way, the kinds of meetings that were held. And then in pivotal conversations, what I was trying to illustrate there, what underlies what you saw. This is a person who has a pretty assertive personality in the first place. But at the expert level, we tend to either be highly assertive or highly accommodative, meaning if we have a disagreement, all right, we can do it your way. And what underlies that sort of split, or tendency to flip-flop back and forth between those two orientations, is a basic discomfort with experiencing the conflict or the difference that comes up when we have disagreements with other people. It's like, if I can just kind of bulldoze the situation or just, let my point of view shine here, then I'm not going to have to deal with that discomfort of other people going back and forth with different points of view and having to consider, well, what do I really believe, what I not really believe, right? So that's kind of what underlies that behavior that we were chuckling at, but that we're all capable of. Okay, so that's a kind of a quick overview. What I'd like to do now is introduce you to the achiever level. So here are the key takeaways for the achiever level. So my assumptions about leadership have shifted. I still use my authority and use my expertise, but they're no longer the central tools for me. I really feel like leadership is about inspiring, motivating other people to achieve larger objectives by challenging them and making it satisfying for them to be engaged in our work. Now, just as with when we were climbing the mountain, I can still do the things I could do before. I can still operate at the expert level if and when I need to. But I have this strategic orientation, right? You heard a word come up that didn't come up in the first one. That word was customer. Right? There's much more of a, this is part of the systems perspective that begins to click in at the achiever level. You see, whatever you're looking at, you see it in its larger context. You see your business in larger context. And you think in terms of outcomes, not just in terms of doing things the right way, but in terms of, are we doing the right, are we headed in the right direction? And of course that gives you more flexibility. You can change your tactics to get where you need to go as circumstances change. Stakeholder buy-in becomes a real passion at the achiever level. Okay? It's like, I recognize that if I'm going to get anything done in this organization, if I'm going to make any changes, I've got to get buy-in from the other key players, or this is really not going to work. Now, different achiever level leaders have different styles about how they go about that. Some are more sellers, some are more includers, but the underlying effort there is to get people bought in to the changes that I want to make. I'm seeing my team as a system now. I see that my job is to motivate and that team and help them to really work together effectively. That's reflected in the kinds of meetings that are held and the way in which those meetings are held. And finally, pivotal conversations. You saw somebody stepping up and having a tough conversation, right? That really was, in a sense, avoided in the previous scenario. So in this case, what we find in the research is that a person's style may still be more toward an assertive style, or maybe a bit more toward an accommodative style. But there's more of the other side of the equation that the person can call on and bring in. So if I'm a pretty assertive individual, I still have an ability to listen, check in, make sure that what I'm trying to persuade somebody about is hitting home or not, etc. So those are the high level takeaways for those levels. So finally, and I would just, as a general observation, I would say that we find that in terms of leadership culture, and this is a big generalization, but I don't think it's too far off. If you look at the middle management ranks of most companies, you see a very strongly expert leadership culture, and more of an achiever culture at the executive ranks. Are there exceptions to that? Yes, but I think that that's just something that I tend to see. Yeah.
I was wondering, I saw something also that at the achiever level, which I wonder whether is part of the achiever level. Ed, as an expert, came in and implemented his way of doing things and
right.
got it going. Ed at the achiever level was mindful and looked at what the founder and the founder's daughter had been doing and was aiming to build on that
yes.
while moving it his way.
Very astute observation, yeah. And what that ties in with is it's like not only the strategic thinking capacity, which is an ability to think farther out and think in terms of outcomes, etc., can also be aimed at the past. And so there's a longer time frame both forward and backwards. and a greater tendency to appreciate the value of things that have been done in the past, that, as you say, can be built upon. So yes, you're right, that is part of the achiever. There's a lot of nuances here, even beyond what we can present tonight. But so here's the catalyst would do, and say, I'm going to stereotype a little bit, like, okay, HR person, HR VP, come in here. We need a culture change program. Can you roll out a culture change program for us while we're doing the business? Right? Okay, strike a chord, man. So the catalyst level leaders were more like, no, we're going to create the new culture right here in this team, this executive team. And until we have something that's really different, that really matches what we're trying to create, we're not going to roll out anything. Okay? And when we do start leading the organization in the direction of this new kind of culture, we're going to do it together, because we will learn how to work together as a real leadership team. Pivotal conversations, you saw that same challenge of having to deal with this poor-performing VP, and yet it was a very different conversation, right? There was, what we find at the catalyst level is that leaders tend to be equally comfortable and skilled at asserting their point of view and at being receptive and listening to other people. So that creates that dynamic of dialogue, and they tend to go a little deeper. They tend to look for possibilities, win-win possibilities, if they are to be had. So this wasn't trying to illustrate that you always find a place in your organization for poor performers. It was more the idea that if there is a creative solution, the catalyst level leader is going to search it out. Okay, so what I've been presenting tonight, I'm not trying to say to you that take all of your current conceptions of leadership and throw them out the window and replace it with this really cool one that I'm presenting tonight. Although I do think this really adds some important things to the way that we think about leadership. But to the extent that you want to try on this as a lens for looking at your own leadership, the people who work for you, with you, your organization, a couple of things that are kind of good to keep in mind about the overall research findings. First of all, we're not going to be skipping stages and levels. So if you have somebody working for you that's dyed-in-the-wool expert, don't expect them to be a catalyst by next month. It's very much a developmental process that has to be nurtured and guided along the way. You retain the capacities you developed at previous levels. I kept saying, you can still do the things that you could do as an expert or an achiever. So sometimes people will say, so I guess you don't want too many catalysts in your organization because then everybody would be kind of up in the clouds. Not really, because the catalyst level leaders that we studied were able to operate at any of these levels. They had just a broader repertoire than those who could only operate at the expert and achiever levels. So don't worry about it. If you're interested in developing higher levels of agility, don't worry about that you're going to lose something. You're going to gain something. The last thing is that agility levels, even though we can kind of talk about them in static ways, it's not really static. Our agility level varies throughout the day, and in some cases that's perfectly that's the most effective way to do something. You don't want to be at the catalyst level all the time. There's times that you need to be very tactical about certain things that you're doing. The trick is to be conscious and proactive about it, as opposed to suddenly finding that you're micromanaging your team because you're under a lot of stress, and whereas you're perfectly capable of leading your team at a higher level of agility. So part of the stepping back process and practice usually includes just kind of catching yourself and well, what level of agility am I at? Which one do I want to be at? And recognizing that different situations require different agility levels. Okay, so you might be sitting there thinking, wow, I guess this is a pretty nice framework. It's an interesting way to think about leadership, but can you actually do anything with this? Are there really any applications for this framework? And I'm not going to go into detail about this right now, but just to give you an idea, these are all the different kinds of applications that are listed up here that we've developed in our consulting and training and coaching services that we provide. So there certainly are, we find that there are ways to work with leaders and teams and organizations to help them lift their agility level up. Before I go to the Q&A, I just want to mention a couple of different avenues that you can take. If you found anything at all intriguing tonight, you might want to explore further. And so a couple of avenues. One, there's the book. And we happen to be selling the book tonight at just actually a little bit under cost. I'd be happy to sign if anybody wants to sign. There are resources on our website, which is out of commission. We just learned last night for a couple of days. But soon it will be back online. And there's a handout here with leadership agility resources that sort of lists some of the different kinds of things on our website, such as a white paper that summarizes the 3 levels of agility and some other things. It also mentions that we're doing our Agile Change Leader Lab public open enrollment program that we do twice a year, actually doing Monday and Tuesday. And we just had 2 people cancel. So if anybody's interested in a half-price ticket, come see us. Those are all described on this handout. Also, there's going to be a sign-up sheet if anybody's interested in getting our what we call our thought letter on leadership agility. That's another way to explore further. We have a LinkedIn group on, we have a leadership agility group on LinkedIn that you're all welcome to join if you want to. And I would also want all of you to feel free to contact me directly if you have questions or thoughts or anything. So, all that said, let's step back a little bit and talk about the material that's been presented tonight. Questions, comments? Yes?
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about middle managers that want to be agile, and maybe perhaps by nature they're at the point where they could be, but they're thwarted by the organization.
Middleman, yeah, sure. Middleman,
yeah.
Yeah.
Become more agile in certain organizations.
Yes, middle managers who, just repeating this so you can be heard, who may be operating at the expert level, may be preferring to operate at a higher level of agility, but feeling that upper management is kind of squelching their agility level. Yeah. I was just working with the senior team of in the product organization of a Fortune 100 high-tech company who was experiencing exactly that. In that case, we were doing our one-day introduction to leadership agility with that group, which allowed them to assess the pace of change and the level of complexity in their environment, sort of figure out what level of agility we at and what would we like to be at, and that's where this came out. It was like, yeah, we've actually kind of been moving backwards a little bit because we've been getting so much pressure on short-term focus, and so they only began to do this in that particular afternoon where we were really discussing this. But they recognized that in order for them to deal with this phenomenon, they had to be a more cohesive team. And they had to think together about how to communicate with upper management in such a way that, that they didn't want to be disrespectful, they wanted to be heard, but also got across some of the actual consequences of the approach that had been taken over the past, let's say, 9 months in that organization. So there's a lot more to that, but at an individual level, the toughest thing, I think, in terms of raising your agility level and kind of keeping it up there is if you have an expert boss, right? So, because you're kind of being micromanaged. And that's, we've worked in coaching context with helping people deal with that situation. It's tough. And I think the main thing I would say about that is that the people who have succeeded in making that a better situation have been ones that have, in one way or another, been able to negotiate with their boss to manage them to outcomes. In other words, if I can get to this place, if I can produce these numbers, if I can do whatever, will that help you to, have less meetings with us. And then part of it is to frame it, what's in it for the expert boss to change the way they approach things, right? Because, you know, it's not really necessarily working for them either. So that's just a couple of quick thoughts on that. Other questions?
Yeah, this is kind of in the more specific sense. Sorry, specific sense of the word agile. But, you know, so what do you do in the situation kind of in my organization is they want, you know, the top executives really want agile. So they say, okay, everybody has to do agile. And then it's a matter of everybody in the organization proving that they're doing agile. And then, like, talking to some of the low-down developers, they're like, okay, I got to go to these stupid stand-up meetings, and I got to pretend that I'm doing agile and fitting into this stuff, you know. And, you know, I know that the top manager wants us to be more flexible, but they also kind of do things like have a separate strategy group and, you know, have all these things that, you know, so.
Yeah. Those senior executives, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it sounds like from what you're saying that in some sense, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but in some sense the way that Agile's been introduced is there's something a little superficial about it, or something where it's focused more on the appearance of doing it, or doing these certain practices, or whatever, and upper management may just feel like, well, gee, I've heard that Agile gets things done faster and the quality's better and people seem to be happier when they're doing Agile, so, you know, and they want to be able to sort of check off the box that they're doing it.
Right.
And so I think, I mean, I don't know. We'd have to have a much longer conversation about what to do about your situation there, but it just reminds me of what I hear so often about when people are not satisfied in one way or another with the way Agile is going. It often has to do with there's not a real solid understanding and commitment to the philosophy that underlies it. And there's, I mean, one of the things I'm trying to bring with this leadership agility perspective is that there's a very important role for middle and upper managers to play in creating an agile organization. And it's not just being, let them go off and do it and just kind of periodically prove that they're doing it. But, you know, we have our own evolution into a more agile way of operating that we need to focus on. And that includes how we relate to people at lower levels of the organization. So.
Can I jump in real quick on
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Please, send these people to Agile for Executives in a couple
Okay. Agile for Executives. Yes. Did you have something?
AgileForExecutives.com.
Yes.
I'm no expert. And my observation is that the term agile management is like an oxymoron.
Okay.
To me, again, I haven't even practiced agile, but my observation is that agile, it's all about who's got control. Agile to me is about a bottom-up information. Where these MBA types that are, arguably, earn their positions, they're very confident in what they do, are very much about a top-down approach, command and control.
Yeah.
They'll make any cars, any car. And I think that these people have to learn to move away from command and control and to actually trust that someone might be their equal and someone from the bottom might have an opinion that is more important than theirs. That's a fundamental problem. They have a really difficult time solving.
Right. So you're saying the quote MBA types, command and control types, are having trouble trusting that other people don't need to be controlled as much as they want to control them.
They're very, tell me if I'm wrong, they're very oriented about a top-down approach where they're going to have a strategic vision, they're going to set information flows downhill, and people should lose their goal.
Yep. Right. I mean, that's the kind of organizations that we have evolved, and we're trying to create. I mean, Agile is one of the things that's out there that's helping organizations go to a different place, but it's often a struggle. And I think because there's not necessarily a lot of attention to what's the kind of leadership qualities that people need to have. I really,
It's not about leadership. The point is they need to be followers. It's like the last thing they ever want to do.
you're saying it's not that you need leadership.
They can't understand this discovery process that software development.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Right, but there's I'm submitting that there's a kind of leadership that understands that and nurtures that. Okay, so just I don't use the term leadership to mean command and control. I'm trying to present a more nuanced way in which leadership goes through an evolution. And at the lower levels of agility, you have the command and control approach you're talking about. And as people grow through these levels of agility, they create environments that are more hospitable to, more encouraging of agile and related kinds of approaches. I think we're almost at the end here. Yes?
Yeah. When I looked at like leadership, agility, I was trying to think, well, what is the opposite of that? And can I phrase that in more positive terms that people might actually like? And I think I came up with it, and I'm wondering, the opposite of an agile organization in that sense is one that has stability and predictability. You know how it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's not agile, it's stable and predictable.
A lot of people, a lot of organizations want that, and can see benefits to it. I mean, they seem to be opposites, but can you join them?
Yeah, well, I see it as a continuum and not as just opposites. And if you have a highly stable environment, a stable organization can work just fine. The problem is, look around and see how many stable environments you can find. Right? Not too many. So, am I getting the hook here? I think I'm. Okay. One more.
I was curious as to how someone who's really worked at it. How long does it take to go from? You said you have to go through the stages to become at the catalyst level.
Yeah.
How long does it take to go through those stages? And is there a way to do like a self-assessment to figure out where you are in that evolution?
Okay. Is there a way to do a self-assessment, and then how long does it take to go to a new level of agility? Yeah. Well, there are ways to do self-assessments. The book is actually designed as a kind of self-assessment tool. So by reading through it, if you kind of go through it, it will ask you questions as you go through and you read the stories and so on. You should get a fairly good feeling about where you are in that. And it may be that you lead teams a little bit in a more agile way than you lead change or something, right? It's not going to be exactly, but it tends to be kind of in the same ballpark. We have a 360, as I mentioned, but that's not a self-assessment. Now, in terms of what it takes to go from one level to another, it takes an inner, the willingness to practice at a higher level of agility. So it's like as you step back and re-engage and kind of get that going, there's some tips in the book as to what level of awareness and intentionality is needed to operate at the catalyst level. Okay. But that's, of course, also what we do in our coaching, and I'm thinking of an example. It also depends on sort of, as you really start looking at it, it's kind of like, am I at the entry-level achiever, or am I kind of maxed out as an achiever, and I've really been there and done that completely, and I'm ready to move on to the next level? I'm thinking of somebody who was like that in terms of expert level. I mean, he was real bright and had really done everything you could do as an expert, but was still kind of holding on to that and had a sense that maybe there was something else. And so through a 9-month coaching process, he moved quite a ways into the achiever level and was managing his team in a much more empowered and participative way, and was able to have a lot more time for strategic matters himself. He thought that. He said, well, I don't have time to be strategic. Well, then he realized, well, that's because of the way I'm managing my team. And actually, if I managed my team differently, I would have time to be strategic. And he really sort of reveled in that. But anyway, so we're at 8:30?
Yeah, should
Okay.
we give a big thanks to
Okay.